It's a scary show overall, but it's never enough where you're tensed throughout the thing. And I think that's what I probably enjoyed the most about it. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to What's in the Box. We will be doing a deep dive review, and then we'll have a spoiler discussion. So, Christian, let's kind of just review the show overall and then get into some of our favorite moments and do some spoiler talks and theories on what we have. The Haunting of Hill House, dude, I don't do horror. It's a little thing I'll let all of you make fun of me on. I don't care for horror. I don't want to do horror. I'm watching this show, and I loved it. I love every second of it, even with the quote-unquote controversial ending, which we'll talk about later on in this conversation. And again, I'm watching this show with the lights on, and I'm still getting freaked the fuck out, you know?
I'm a big fan of horror, and I think the problem is that a lot of horror is not very good. But in the last couple of years, we've got this weird renaissance where people realize that atmospheric horror is way scarier than whatever bullshit jump scare they're going to give you, right? This is like a old school haunted house film. Like, it feels in a lot of ways kind of like The Shining, which is interesting because Mike Flanagan after this is directing the Shining sequel, Dr. Sleep, the Stephen King book.
Which I can't wait.
Yeah. Well, now you're like, okay, sure. Beforehand, you're like, a Shining to the sequel. Why the fuck would anyone do that? And then you see this and it's like, this is a 10 episode proof of concept of why he has every right to make that fucking movie, man. It's like it's character driven. Like, yes, it's scary. Yes, it's atmospheric, but like each scare is inherently built upon something that directly relates to the characters. And even just structurally, you know what I mean? It's a 10 episode show. You get like this event that happens early on, and then you spend the next like 5 episodes just going to each and every one of the kids. You're seeing different perspectives kind of happen multiple times. Like, time is out of joint, if I can quote my Shakespeare for the week. Because we have a storyline in the 70s and we know something happened there, or maybe not the 70s. I guess this is present day, right? I don't know why I made it the 70s, the 90s, whatever. And so you're seeing that something bad happened in the past, and then these are the results of it. And so what I loved about it is that it's, I think, much more about, like, they use haunting as a metaphor while it's actually happening still, but it's about like family trauma, right? Like, this is this thing that happened in their past, and like it forever changed them into the people they are now. I loved it, dude. I loved literally every single second of it. I loved the cinematography, the directing, the writing, the acting. And all of those actors are Mike Flanagan, like, repertoire players.
You're right. I think one of the early criticisms people could make ultimately is that it starts off really strong. I think the first 6 episodes are really great, but I think some people might have some problems with it because it becomes an individual story piece of each of the siblings that go through the events of it, right? And I think that, honestly, in a way where someone might say that might be a slow part, I think those are really important, because when you go to the eventual episode 6, which we'll talk about later on, I mean, you have to have those moments of it all comes down to when you're a kid. And if crazy shit happens to you as a kid, these are the results of what you're dealing with now, right? And you have someone like Steve where he's the only one after the events when he's a kid, none of this really affects him, right? And that's why he writes this horror novel, right? In the spectrum of the TV show, and he's like, guys, this stuff is make believe. Don't worry about it. But then you have someone like Theo. When you go to her episode piece, you end up finding out why she's the character that she is. You know, you go to someone like Luke, and you understand why he's a drug addict, because he has to cope with the crazy shit he saw. Which, again, without getting spoilery right now, he goes through a lot of crazy stuff, you know? I love the whole counting 1, 2, 3, 4, and the person just right behind him in the Luke-centric episode. Oh my God, it's blowing me away. You know, to even finding the characters of Shirley, right? And Nell, you know, and the reveal that happens with them. And, you know, I think that's what makes this story so great, is that it's a scary show overall, but it's never enough where you're tensed throughout the thing. And I think that's what I probably enjoyed the most about it.
Every single scene is building to a larger moment, right? Mm-hmm. Which largely comes up in episode 6. Like, I'm sorry, episode 6 of this show, no disrespect to Daredevil, like, it's not going to the filmmaking perspective. It is like so fucking wonderful, right? It starts off with a 23-minute one shot, okay? Done in real time. And if you remember a couple weeks back, we talked about Kidding, right? Kidding did that 90-second, 2-minute scene, and it took them 18 hours to block it out and do it properly.
Yeah.
Can you fucking imagine how long it took them to nail this scene in one shot? I mean, it's like fantastic. And that's the other thing. Like you have to have people hitting their marks. You have to make sure that while you're moving the camera, the light crew that's behind the camera is all moving at the same time and the same speed, because any number of things can go wrong when you're doing that. It's an achievement, man. And you're right. It's not necessarily straight horror, but I would say it's probably the scariest thing I've watched in a long time.
I'm sorry, like after watching Westworld and just all the great TV we've seen, right? And I think of Castle Rock, and then I see this, and I'm just looking back at all the amazing TV I've seen, and the way all of this is shot. Like, how can you not appreciate something like this? That one shot of them for 22 minutes straight. I'm watching the episode, and I'm like texting Christian, and I'm like, this is blowing my fucking mind right now. Like the way everything is shot and portrayed in this, you have to appreciate the cinematography. And again, I would implore anyone, even if you don't watch I was going to say if you don't watch a single episode, if you don't watch any of the series, just watch episode 6. I think you can this is the separation of great and excellent television versus the mediocre stuff, right? Like, it's one of those things. It's like, and again, to bring it back to the Walking Dead thing, we give it lots of tough love. And again, the episode we saw last week, it's okay. It wasn't bad. But how are you 9 seasons in and you're not making excellent television, right? And then you see something like this where, out of context, just watch this episode and watch how everything is portrayed, and it is going to blow your mind.
The statues will move, right? So when it's a one shot, like they'll go down a hallway, and then when they come back, the statues are turned the other way as if they're like witnessing something. Mm-hmm. I don't know. The attention to detail is amazing. Also, the show is littered with ghosts, like irrelevant ghosts. That's the name of my band. That have no bearing on the story, right? But like, I don't know if you've seen a couple of these where it's just like someone leans in, and then in the corner there's a goddamn ghost just staring at them, and then it goes away at the next scene. And it's not like in other horror films where like the music would jump right there, right, to give you a jump scare. It's just there, eerily hanging out in the background.
There's so many great.
You know what's exciting about that too is that they let you know on Front Street that there's a certain sense of safety and security because you know that they're adults, right? Like we know they all survived whatever happened in the previous timeline. Does not make any of that less scary. And I think that's really impressive.
You see the psychology of whenever you're a kid and how something impacts you, you know, it carries over you throughout your life. You know, we see that once again with Luke becoming, you know, like a drug addict. You know, we see Steve, the non-believer, writing the horror stuff. You know, you have Theo, who somehow has I don't want to say the ability. She's a psychic empath. I think that's what it is.
Yeah.
You see someone like Shirley, who she's all about having a family and just trying to piece things together, right? And then, you know, you have Nell, who, man, we'll end this review and then we'll talk about spoilers. You know, her and just how she copes with sleep paralysis. And that is a frightening thing because, listen, you don't have to believe in ghosts. You don't have to believe in the chupacabra or whatever the hell's out there. But sleep paralysis is real. And when they make something with the real and just kind of something which is, you know, fantasy or something that might make you scared and kind of mesh into one thing, you kind of get something really effective with the storytelling, or at least for me, they nail it with The Haunting of Hill House. So let's go ahead and real quickly now, if you guys don't want anything spoiled, you have a few seconds to leave. I'll do a countdown. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Let's talk about some spoilers. Christian, the reveal of the bent neck lady being Nell herself. What the fuck? That was crazy to me. That blew my mind.
As a sight gag is one of the scariest fucking things I've ever seen. They gave us a lot of clues for a lot of these outcomes, man. They were all there. That's how fucking smart the show is. We just didn't see it. So yeah, when you kind of see that her dying moment, right, she's going to hang herself, it's the bent neck lady becoming the bent neck lady. But beyond that, we go back to all of those moments when she was a child being haunted. Like again, Shakespeare time is at a joint, right? Like there is a weird time loop that she is directly responsible for her own haunting because she dies in the house, right? Like the house does not play by the rules of linear time. Like shit is to quote True Detective, right? Time is a flat circle, right? So Nell dies in the house years later, but she haunts herself in the past. And I loved that, dude. And that's probably the most like tied in together haunting. All the other ones have their you know, independent reasons why they're scary to the individual people. But I think the bent neck lady, because of who Nell is in the show and like what she represents, it's kind of the most important character, ghost character of the entire thing. What do you say?
Yeah, no, I mean, she definitely pieces the thing together. And again, that's what reinforces the strength of episode 6, where, each of the siblings talk about how, like, hey, it was always Nell that always tried her best to bring the family together for group gatherings, whether it was holidays or, important moments in their lives, like the weddings and all that stuff. And Luke not going to Nell's wedding really is heartbroken, or really is heartbreaking for me when, you kind of see this journey with all these characters from start to finish. And you're like, damn, dude, that's really intense. And, I think that's why the reveal and also co-host next to Nell with the show was the house itself. So let's talk about the house, right? And let's go ahead and now talk about the ending of The Haunting of Hill House. There's a lot of people saying, I hate how it kind of loosely made it a happily ever after. But here's the thing I want to throw to you, and I don't know if you felt this way, because this is how I took it, right? It's like, oh, on the surface, it's a happily ever after. But if you've been paying attention to this whole show, the house does a great job of hypnotizing the people who are eventually going to die, thinking this is all good and it's okay to die, and just kind of stay here. Let's relax a little bit. Just don't worry about the outside world. That external stuff, that's the villainous shit happening over there. Over here, you're safe. And when the father's like, "Bye, Steven, I'm gonna leave," and it's like, okay, now I guess Steve's a believer with the ghosts and shit. But hold on, the father he's just going to die here happily ever after. It's like, yeah. And then they end it with the family montage of everyone being okay. And I think, again, that's the illusion that I think Steve's father is also playing in his head, where it's like, oh, yeah, my family's good. We're Gucci. But the house won. It's not really a happy ending if you think about it. Am I speaking out of line here, or how did you think
I see what you're saying, but I think like the ending is what the ending is. I don't think it's like a Shining situation where we pull out and it's like Overlook Hotel 1921 and Jack Nicholson's there. I don't think it's like that at all. For sure. I think like what happened. I think they made a point to have Steve see something with his own two eyes. It's funny, earlier you said like he's the guy who was unaffected by all this. Largely, Steve is the most affected by this. He has no relationships with any of his family. He burned all those bridges. His fucking wife has left him. Like, there is a lot of problems with him, right? I think having him confirm at the end, because they all get out of the red room. They're all stuck in the house. They get out, but he sees his father's dead body, right? It's the confirmation of this thing that he must have known inside, but never wanted to admit to himself. And he finally does. I think it's just straight a happy ending, man. I think like it's weird because the rest of the show is so dark, but it's overwhelmingly optimistic. Turns into a motherfucking Cameron Crowe movie, right? Because it's just like indie song with a voiceover, and then they all lived happily ever after. Mm-hmm. So yeah, I mean, it's a little, it may seem a little cheesy compared to the rest of the story, but it's like, you were rooting for these people. Did you really want them all to die? Like when they did the Luke fake out death, I was ready to fucking riot, dude. I was going to throw my goddamn controller through the TV, man.
Let's talk about that real quick. Again, that's effective emotional tugging they're doing with me, where I'm like, dude, it's Nell that brought him in, because again, I don't know the science. I don't know anything about it. So I'm claiming I'm not going to know. Please don't attack me here. The whole thing of twins kind of having like that connection, even if they're far away or somewhere. I'd love to know more about that, and in the show, they do these great things where when you end up finding out that Nell died, I think at the end of episode 5, right? And then Steve is like, he ends up telling Luke, dude, Nell is dead and she committed suicide. And Luke says, she didn't commit. I mean, like, she died, but like it wasn't an accident. Like, there's really more to it than we're led to believe. And then when you see that, he goes back to the house and he wants to think he's trying to end it himself, and it doesn't work. And then he gets crawled in to the red room, which, we'll talk about the red room next. Him being sucked in and then him almost being out of it. And Nell, although she lost because the house won and took her life, Nell still had enough power to tell Luke, no, don't fall for this shit like me and Mom. Get the hell out. And I'm so glad he came out, because that was crazy to me, dude. And I was really happy to see him coming out of this alive, because I would say he's the one that's definitely suffered the most from this,
I found myself rooting for him more than any other character. Like it's largely because of his the giant glasses child actor. I mean, you're right. You want to tell him it's going to be okay, that you do get out of this, but he's like this. He's the most sympathetic character out of all of them, right? And they do a good job because again, they give every single character their own episode, but not in a way that makes you feel disconnected from any of the other characters or from the main plot. So, you know, with him, his story, it's like you already feel bad for him because he's this like sad kid, but you feel bad for him because the family largely looks at him as an albatross, right? As the black sheep of the family who's always fucking up. And so I felt especially bad for him whenever he's just trying to do the right thing, where he busted out of fucking the rehab center, still clean, still hasn't used, but he got into all the haunting shit, right? He got really scared. He looks like he is a drug addict, like he's back on drugs. It's kind of interesting. We talked about this with like Fear the Walking Dead, right? The early seasons, it's interesting because Nick was a drug addict. They're like, of course you think you saw something, but you didn't really see something. And it's kind of the same thing with Luke. They tie it back to like, he's just trying to get people to believe him. Like he wants to do what's right. And his own family doesn't believe him. Like he's a victim of the house. And that's the big takeaway, right? Is that everyone is still dealing with the trauma they inflicted all those years ago.
Let's go ahead and talk about two more things. Which first, let me just say, spoiler talk. I feel like I have to emphasize this again because I don't want anyone to be ruined by this because this shit freaked me the fuck out. Again, I'm watching this with the lights on and I'm just writing down notes for the show. Dude, we get that fucking jump scare in episode 8. What the fuck was that, man?
Yeah, well, I did text you. I gave you warning, too. I was like, well, listen, Dolores, my fiance, she screamed like as loud as I've ever heard her scream while watching this episode. It's the best jump scare I've ever seen. And I hate jump scares. They're cheap. Dude. This one didn't feel cheap. They waited. It was so patient. You were so fucking like absorbed with the conversation. And then out of nowhere, like I'm a grown man. I definitely yelled out loud. It's awesome, man. It was so good.
It was so good because you see Theo and, you know, Shirley just arguing. And it's funny because it becomes tense. And now it's kind of like, listen, there was some bottled up shit that they didn't want to reveal. But at that point, she's trying to reveal, this is why I kissed your husband. And she's trying to explain it. And Shirley's just not opening up, which let me quickly say, one of my criticisms is I felt like there wasn't enough with her, or she definitely got the shaft when it comes to like the strength of the other characters and knowing more about their backstory, right?
With Theo or Shirley?
Shirley, yeah.
Yeah.
And you just see that like boiling up, and when they're both just going at it, and then that monster comes in the car, you're just like, what the fuck was happening? You know, again, I'm trying not to yell right now, but when I saw that, I'm like, that's some effective shit right there. So kudos to the show because that blew me away. What do you think is the significance of the Red Room, and why do you think it was locked? Right, because we end up finding that revelation later that it was never locked. It just seemed like the house always wanted to open up when it needed to effectively for each individual character, right? We see with Steve, it's the gaming room. With Shirley, it's the family room. With the mother, it's like this nice wholesome reading room, right? Theo, you know, she was dancing to like Paula Abdul or whatever. And I'm like, you go, girl. You know, you're doing your shit. And who's the other person I'm trying to think of? Luke. It was the treehouse, right? And again, bringing it back to Luke because Luke is the one, you know, I definitely felt the most connected with and his story. Abigail was always real, dude. That was the thing.
I thought Abigail was super fake, and then that was a fucking twist. And I'm like, holy shit, they just murdered a child. And it was like not a glorious death. It was very bad. It was very hard to watch. Man.
Yeah, no, that was hard. It's like the whole time again where you're like, okay, the mother's clearly on some psychedelics. I don't know what the fuck is going on. Abigail was always real, and the mom just poisoned her, which again led to the you know, let me ask you. It led to this moment where now the parents, right, of Abigail,
Dudleys, yeah,
who end up telling the father, right, like, hey, this is, please keep our house, or please keep this house here because this is how we see Abigail, right? And now he's put in this weird situation where it's guilt that like, well, fuck, I can't do that because I guess technically it's my fault because my wife killed their child. So you're put between a rock and a hard place. And what do? Right. And I think it's easy for everyone to see after the events of the show. Well, I definitely would have burned it down, bro. It's like, well, you can't fucking say that. And, maybe that's why he kept the secret that he did for so long and why he ends up telling Steven and he doesn't tell anyone else. He just tells Steven that like, yeah, this is why this house has always been here.
Yeah, see, that was also it's an auxiliary moment, but it was one of my favorite parts of the show because the Dudleys are the caretakers of the property and they're there and they look weird and religious the whole time, but they end up being really cool. And even after their daughter dies, they're really cool. And so that's like one of the bookends, right? You have, the Dudleys now very old, right? He's carrying his wife because she's about to die. He carries her on the grounds because, again, if you die in the house, you stay around. You're still around, man. I thought that was like oddly fucking pretty, right? For a show that's so dark, like that house is purely evil and there's all this bad shit going on and it's hurt people. But in the same way, it's a way that people get to see their loved ones forever, right? You can't burn it down. Luke tried to burn that house down. It's always going to stand. That's whatever. But it's a little comforting to know, right? Those kids can go back. They shouldn't, but they could go back and their parents would still be there, right? That the Dudley's guy is always going to be with his wife and his child. Because that's the one special thing about this horrific place is that like it keeps people around forever. So I don't know, man. I loved it. I thought that was a sweet little ending, man, for the rest of the optimistic ending.
Yeah. No, well, that's the thing where we differ. Again, I think what I'm getting out of it is that, yeah, it's supposed to be a beautiful thing, but the house is ultimately winning, and that's the screwed up part with it,
But why do you think it's ultimately winning? Only because that episode starts, right? And you get the beginning of the finale is fucking wonderful because you're sitting there for 20 minutes not knowing where we are. It's like seemingly we got out of the house and this is in the future, and now Steve's wife is pregnant. You're like, okay, this is happening. And then it pulls the rug from underneath you. You realize it's been fucking like a minute and a half or some shit, right?
Yeah.
So that was my point. I don't feel like they would have gone to great lengths to do that only to then trick you again. And there was no like final thing that really would have led you to believe that. But I like that we're having differing opinions on something. We saw the same thing. We think different things happen. So that's encouraging, right?
Yeah. Look at that. We have different opinions, people. So
finally.
But yeah, so that was The Haunting of Hill House. Please go ahead and watch it. And if you don't even watch any of it, you got to watch episode 6. I mean, I'm just saying, just as a fan of television, I really wouldn't understand if someone says they watch that and they're like, I don't get it, because now your opinion on TV is mute to me.
Stop whatever you're doing. Stop watching whatever bullshit you're watching. It's not as good as this show is.